I'm chairman of the Environmental Commission of Piang, and the Environmental Commission of Piang is the youngest commission in the history of Piang. It is some 23 years old, but from the beginning, the Environmental Commission has dealt with the development of guidance for sediments, for dredged material, and always, of course, under the aspect of contamination, which causes the problems in managing and dealing with this. So everyone wants, of course, to have his project going on and not stopped or having uncalculated costs in it. And I'm sure you will learn a lot by the presentations and the case studies after my introduction how this looks like. I want to say from the beginning I have to leave after my presentation, and don't be worried, I'm not disappointed or not angry if I leave. I have to go to the Piang Council meeting, which is parallel in one of the next rooms. Okay, my contents briefly. I want to give in short introduction the environmental framework we are in general acting in on a global, and I will give also a little bit on the European picture. Then I will focus on, I think, the main global existing guidance, the international guidance for dredged material management, which comes under the London Convention. And in this respect, we derive from ENVICOM also many Piang guidance documents, which is available and which is certainly of interest if you don't know them. And I will focus very briefly on this. Thank you. And at the end, I will give a little bit an outlook. We are dealing, of course, nowadays with the question of sustainability. And in this regard, I want to focus on an initiative we have in Piang calling Working with Nature. And this is, of course, also related to sediments and dredged material. So very briefly, always we are talking about what amount we are dredging a year. So certainly we have to divide between maintenance dredging, which is a regular thing, and dredging for construction, which can be also very huge amounts, but which are more single activities. So this is a scheme. It's maybe not very up to date, but it's only a figure which we collected some years ago throughout Europe. You see a sum about 200 million cubic meters of dredged material, which is dredged annually, mainly for maintenance activities, and mainly in coastal areas. And always the discussion is, how much is this contaminated? What is contamination? When do we talk about the word contamination itself? So, of course, you ever have some substances in it, but when is something contaminated? It can be a philosophical discussion at the end, but at the end, I think the targets and thresholds you have in your country are deciding about that, what you're doing. So, we decided over many years, or in 2 decades, that most of that is not contaminated and should not be regarded as waste. So you see the environmental awareness is raising mainly over the last 3 decades, and there are UN Millennium Goals. We are talking about how we follow sustainable ways of acting. We have corporate social responsibility and ISO guidelines, and all that frames our planning, thinking when we're dealing with sediments and dredged material and when you want to have approval for your project. Also, I want to highlight the so-called precautionary and prevention principle, especially when you're talking about contamination. You see, this is also something which is developed on the global scale. The UN Declaration, Rio Declaration here, or we have also in Europe, for example, the Sustainable Development Strategy. These are all counting on the prevention and precautionary principle. So this means you have to have an idea what you are dealing with, and how can you act in this direction. And then only a rough picture, I don't want to deepen that in detail, is a picture from Europe about the last 20 to 30 years about the development of the environmental legislation. You see here, I don't want to touch everything, but for example, the Natura 2000 network is something of interest. You see that nearly 20% of the territory of the EU member states is declared as a protected area. So you certainly very often act in an environmental protected area. And you have to deal with those rules coming from that. And you see here other rules, and this is in fact the backbone of the policy we have in Europe from the environmental perspective. And this is of course clear that if you're talking about contamination, you want to know how would contamination harm the environment under these demands here. So then focusing on dredged material and sediment specific guidance worldwide. The other ones, they don't have specific guidance on dredged material, but this one is the only one really on global scale. You see it comes from the so-called London Convention, 1972. It's the prevention of marine pollution by dumping of waste and other matter. And it applies only for the marine area. So that means for the sea, so to speak. So the idea behind is clear. And under this, it was developed in 1996. Following that, a so-called reverse list about specific materials. And you see here, dredged material is one of this, where under the umbrella of the London Convention, guidance is developed for dredged material. For the other ones too, but for dredged material is our interest today. And you see here the current status worldwide. So it's 87 parties have signed the London Convention. And Argentina, for example, I looked after that, was approved in 1979, the London Convention, but not yet the 96 protocol. So this is something to do for Argentina, and I'm not aware about the other South American countries, but I think it's worth to move in that direction. And under this protocol, the so-called London Convention guidelines for the assessment of dredged material were developed. So this is really the global stepping stone for all of us. Under this, we also have a so-called waste prevention audit. That means you should control and reduce sources of contaminations, which finally are bound then to sediments, and then they are in the dredged material. So there you see there is the prevention and precautionary principle in it, in this audit. Think about how can you control and reduce the sources. When you have your dredging project, maybe you are not thinking from the beginning, how can I reduce the source? But when you have to dredge every year and you have very high cost, you certainly very quickly think about how can I reduce the source to be more cheap and environmentally friendly, of course. So, and finally, this picture is, or this slide summarizes the main elements of the recent update of this dredged material guideline, which the update was adopted in October 2013. So this is the recent one you have. And the main elements are that recognition is that sediment is an important natural source. So the London Convention is talking about preventing putting waste into the sea, but now the guideline states that sediment is an important natural resource. That's a totally different view to it, and that should be used beneficially in ways that reduce the need for disposal at sea. So this is some important message which is fully in line of the guidance we have also developed in PIANC over the years. There is information on management practices now in it. engineering and operational controls that can be used to manage and reduce risks from contaminated sediments, including confined aquatic disposal through capping. This is all new in these guidelines now. There's new guidance for performing characterization for dredged material and developing and applying action lists. It's also something very delicate if you're talking about thresholds and action lists, but I'm sure you will learn from the case studies very quickly about those, how to deal with this. But it's worthwhile if you don't have such a guidance in your country. It's good to start from there. This is the common basis. And there is additional information now for designing and conducting monitoring activities. Always the question. Monitoring lists are getting always bigger, broader, more expensive, whatever. But always what is really needed and what is optional and so on is also could be a lesson for its own. And a reference section that identifies resources where contracting parties can find additional information, technical information on the assessment and management of dredged materials. So these are the main additions and updates of the new dredged material guidelines in the London Convention guidelines here. There is a framework in it. It is a clear guidance how to go forward. It is, I don't want to deepen that, so you can read it better in a paper. But clearly the beginning of all the thing is, can I minimize my dredging amount? Can I reduce sources of contamination? That's the start of your dredging activity. Following this whole process will end up, of course, then in the approval and the implementation of a dredging process. And of course, you have here several options which are following a logic line. You see here, like beneficial use is very one up front. Before you dispose it only, you can make some use of it and create win-win situations, for example. These are options, and I will show it maybe on this slide. It's a little bit better. You see here, here you have the chain, let's see here, the dredging, transport, and then you come to the options. What do I do with the material? What can I do with the material? And the London Convention stays here in the aquatic area. And if you go upland with the material, then you're in the national legislation and mostly in waste legislation here or other legislation, but this is more than related here to water legislation. And then you have various options, and they have different costs, of course, and you have to figure out in your investigations what is possible, what is feasible, and what is sustainable at the end. So, and if you end with treatment, you want to put out the contaminants of the material, then you're at the very end of the chain, which is the most costly one. So you have the dewatering, you have contaminant separation or destruction or immobilization. It's all very expensive and costly. So this is the very end where you hopefully are not going to. That is then sozusagen the final part. If you have really hard contamination in it, and no other option to put it. And so we put with the so-called DGE, which was a Dutch-German exchange some years ago, we compared with the Netherlands and Germany, for example, what are our experiences with the costs to various options. And then you see that relocating the material in the water was at that time so between 1.5 and 5 euro per cubic meter. This is, of course, the most wanted option, what we are thinking at first. But if contamination occurs or other things hinder us to do that, then you see you can here with thermal immobilization, you have 54 euro, but this is only the immobilization. You have to add all the other costs for the disposal side, for the transport, and on. And then you are simply by 100 euros per cubic meter. And if you have to dredge 100,000 of cubic meter, you end up with costs you won't afford. So then, looking a little bit what has PIANC does and the partners. Of course, PIANC has strong relations with the dredging organizations. René Kohlmann is here representing IADC, for example, and also the World Dredging Association, where CEDA, the Central Dredging Association, is relevant for Europe, the central part. So we are very well connected with each other. We are developing guidance together. We are publishing it together, putting the expertise together, and deriving from such conventions where we have the legal background, deriving this specifically for the waterways and port sector, what we think is useful. There are several guidance documents available, and very briefly go through it. Some we have sorted it a little bit. So we have started, when you see here, the London Convention protocol was 96. So in 97 already, the first PIANC activity occurred. Tito Wellinger was, I think at that time, also up front in developing things with PIANC Envicom. And so you see we have developed up to 2008. This is the most recent one, which is giving a comprehensive view on the whole management of dredged material. Then specifically for handling contaminated sediments, you see also here coming with the protocol at that time. Yeah. And another one was then some years later, 2002. So I think they are quite okay. We have to think now and then, should we update? That is PIANC activities to discuss it. When are we have to update things? And then we have, for example, guidance on risk assessment here, specifically views to biological assessment or environmental risk assessment. And we have started this year a new working group on environmental risk management. This is a little bit more comprehensive than this one, but this working group will, of course, will be based on this work documents. Then we are at the moment looking how to deal with dredging activities in environmental sensitive areas. Here is one report published in 2003 already about wetland restoration, but then we published together with UNEP, the United Nations Environmental Programme, a report about dredging around coral reefs. Currently there is a working group closely to be finished, I think this year probably, maybe published beginning of next year, is here environmental aspects of dredging and port construction around coastal plant habitats. Also, I think a very interesting thing. And another one is active at the moment around marine turtles and mammals. So we are adding our guidance here continuously. And not to forget the guidance on the beneficial use, which is one main target also of the London Convention guidance. You see here also in 92, this came up also before the protocol with the reverse list, and the dredge material guidance of the London Convention came into force. But then we have two ones which from 2009. And I can recommend really to have a look in that and to use those guidance. Coming then a little bit to the end of my presentation, the final part, I want to remind you that we are really working on the shift, that we are not talking about waste when we are talking about sediments. At first, sediment is a natural part, is a part of nature and is a resource. And we can use the sediments. And this is a different view when we only see, oh, there can be contaminants in it and this is all waste. I think this has happened already now with the update of the new London Convention guidance for dredge material. This thinking is more and more getting forward. So this is then the message, dredge material is not waste per se. Dredge material are sediments, part of nature, and we can find our way to deal with the nature. And this is then also the message to the way forward. That's the initiative we have, the Working with Nature philosophy. We started in 2008. There were some other initiatives which are in the same direction. For example, in the United States, and is a similar national initiative, and also in the Netherlands. But they are all under this roof, Working with Nature. What is it about? If you have not maybe discovered it, so the idea behind it is, of course, that we try to seek for win-win solutions, that we try to reduce our frustrations and delays and involve stakeholders very, very early, and to discuss what are the best possibilities. And so this means that we want to approach our projects in a different way. Before we have started with the initial design, so establish the project objectives, understand the environment more and more. We're talking about ecosystems here, water ecosystems, and then engage the stakeholders to identify possible win-win opportunities. I think Rotterdam case study is one very good example you will hear a lot about today. And prepare initial project design to benefit navigation and nature. So this is a different view. And another thing is we are currently dealing with with the issue of ecosystem services. Also, we had a workshop in May, a PIANC workshop. This is also something progressing, and we have to find our ways to deal with the way of ecosystem services. What does it mean? It includes that we want to give nature a value in our calculations. And we're not only looking to impact, we're only looking to benefits. So that means that if we want to install a system where we calculate impacts, of course, but on the other hand also benefits. So that may be then the case. For example, if you dredge very often in a river and you take out lots of nutrients, you improve the river maybe for swimming, bathing. That is not your aim as a navigation responsibility, but you do it. So you create a gain for the society, in fact. And this has to be marketed and to be sold and to be derived and calculated in a, let's say, good way. And there's very hot discussions around the world because giving nature an economic value, for example, is very controversially discussed. And the PIANC workshop also stated we should not give simple economic values. We have to be very sensitive in that. But this is still developing. The main thing is that all who are acting in this direction, for example, the working into using elements of working with nature or ecosystem services, we want to know about it, we want to learn from those case studies, and I think this is also part of the seminar today, that you hear various case studies around the world. And in this regard, I want to invite everybody also to submit projects in our Working with Nature database, which is online on the PIANC website. You find it very easily. If you are implementing a project, a dredging project, for example, then please fill in. It's a simple template where you characterize your project and where you are being asked for specific elements which are in the way of thinking, working with nature, ecosystem services, sustainability. We want to learn from that, and we want to also to, let's say, to appreciate those things. You can get for your project a PIANC certificate, Working with Nature certificate, and you may be in the selection for the PIANC Working with Nature Award, which was granted the first time last year and which will be granted the next time on the PIANC Congress in 3 years in Panama. So, the outlook a little bit, my last slide, I guess. If you're confronted with dredging and contaminates, implement the working with nature philosophy, know about it, go also a new way of thinking, approaching your task, enlarge constantly the ecosystem understanding. This is something it's a never-ending story, I would say. The ecosystem is something fantastic, and I think we have not understood fully what we are dealing in. There's always something to discover, and of course, on the other hand, this part is always used if somebody is against your project. But if you take those people on board, it works much better. And I got the information, for example, that you have here also combined working with stakeholders, working with neighboring states, so being very open-minded with partners, especially if you have divided responsibilities like you have here in this binational commissions you have here, the CARP and the CARU. I think try to develop this further on with all this knowledge I was talking and introducing. And probably, and that you should do, is developing your own national guidance on dredge material. With all this material available, I think there is enough ground to make that quite quick. So that is the end of my presentation, and I wish you all now a good seminar. I will, of course, look at the presentations later, and I thank you for your attention.